We are live. And I think the reason we went live that quickly today is that I just told Kate about how someday I was going to share the screenshot or
and how
the
arduous
screen
it was
share
sure.
about clicking the blue Go Live button on the YouTube screen. And then in response, this protracted period of agony when you've clicked Go Live and you're waiting for YouTube through this layers of latency across the internet to come back with the "and you're live" notice, which sometimes takes minutes and it never shows up. And so today, as though I were sharing it with Kate, it's like when you have a problem with your sink and then the plumber shows up and you try to demonstrate it, and of course it works just fine. And so today, merely thinking about sharing the screen with Kate at that time caused it to work perfectly. We are live on time within, I think, a record time, honestly, of my clicking the blue YouTube button. It is 5:01 p.m. because I've been bullshitting for a full minute now. July 13th, 2020. I want to talk about COVID numbers. I don't know what I'm going to say about them because Kate only informed me about 30 seconds before I clicked that blue Go Live button that I had the monologue
I can fact
today.
check your COVID numbers for you while you're talking.
Well, I'm going to do this monologue with no facts at all. The COVID numbers are ugly big, ugly high.
I don't think you need fact checking for that statement.
Yeah, no facts will contradict me on that. And yet, wherever I go in Washington, I'm seeing more and more people behaving like things are returning to normal. Now, I just talked to a friend in California, in Los Angeles, who informed me that everything has just reverted to shutdown. Everything has been, all the reopening has been undone. And so I just want to say, that's us 3 weeks from now. So start acting. If you're not in one of those parts of the country that is already reversing its reopening, stop acting like things are fine where you are. You are already part of the problem. So just act like you live in Los Angeles. I don't care if you actually do. There are many fine people in Los Angeles who 4 weeks ago, were just like you. They were dumb and they were not seeing what was going to happen. You have an advantage over them. You get to look at them and say, they were dumb. I don't have to be dumb. Look at the poor people in Phoenix. They were dumb. I don't have to be dumb. I get to use their advantage and say, gosh, maybe I should act like it's 3 weeks from now. So that's all I have to say. Act like it's 3 weeks from now. Act like somebody actually, their life may depend on your behaving like a responsible rather than an irresponsible person. Be like the president. Wear a mask. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we have Jeff Jarvis, which is almost as good.
That's pretty much not fun. Yes, it's guaranteed.
No,
yes.
I'm excited about it. And it's good to meet you, Jeff.
Good to meet you. I'm big fans of both of you.
I have you, and one of the great fun things about this little project has been that half the time I get to meet Kate's friends and half the time she gets to meet my friends, which means that I get to meet a lot of cool people. So Kate, introduce our guest.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. So Jeff, actually about a year ago, I met you. It was like a year and a month ago. And we met in the Nomad Hotel in New York in a basement. I came in, there was an event. No, but it wasn't a basement. It was like so cold. And it was like, there were no windows. And like, we're in this basement for this very specific reason with about 50 other people to talk about one of the 6 global workshops that Facebook put on for the oversight board. And I came in late and I found my little spot and it was next to Jeff. Jarvis. I was like, holy shit, it's just Jeff Jarvis. I'm sitting next to Jeff Jarvis. And then I proceeded to kind of like zone out for the rest of the like workshop because it was a little boring for me just because it was like my life's work up until that point was that workshop. But it ended up being so fun. And Jeff and I got to spend a lot of time talking. We had a really good table and we talked about a lot of fun stuff. And then we stayed in touch. And it has been wonderful kind of having your Twitter feed around and everything. You are associate professor of journalism at the Craig Newmark School of Journalism at CUNY. And I can't even do justice to your journalism background because you have been at so many different places and all kind of
keep a job.
And illustrious. I don't read it like that at all. But that's but I would love to kind of hear your story to kick us off, kind of hear your path and your story and kind of how you you just have really done one of the most I think intelligent and balanced and even keeled jobs of moving from kind of as someone who kind of grew up so to speak in kind of an like the era of, I mean, newspapers and like everything else. And then kind of like you just transitioned pretty seamlessly into like a digital culture and to reporting on tech. And I think, Stephen Levy and like there's a few others that I think have like done as great a job. And but yeah, so please tell us about kind of like your life story and your job and everything else and how you've ended up doing BuzzWatch and everything else that you're doing.
You are, as ever, too kind. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. I'm not going to bore you with my life story. I'm an old media man in all senses of the word old. Old me, old media. And so I was on newspapers, San Francisco Examiner, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Today, a paper that had no tomorrow. I came to New York. I worked for People magazine. See, it's not so illustrious a career as you thought. As TV critic, I started Entertainment Weekly. I walked out of there in a huff 30 years ago, which amazes me.
Wait, you started Entertainment Weekly? How did I miss that? This is what I'm talking about, Ben. I told you that.
And what does it take to walk out of Entertainment Weekly in a huff?
Oh, so much. I begged my colleagues, can I leave now? And they said, no. Can I leave now? I said, no. And I was just asked to contribute 50 words to the 30th anniversary issue. What's the best and the worst? Well, was the worst when the editor of Time Inc. Did a grade point average of all our reviews to say that we were too mean to Hollywood? Was the worst when the editor sent to drive me crazy scratched his armpit? Was the worst when I walked out and they couldn't find me when I hid in my wife's office? There were so many worsts I couldn't imagine. But I left there. I went to the Daily News. Newsy here. I went to the Daily News as Sunday editor. It was soon went on strike, and it was taken over by none other than Robert Maxwell, now best known as Ghislaine Maxwell's father. And so that was my brush with fame, with having met Ghislaine more than once, and she was a spoiled brat then.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Ghislaine, yes. I heard it from her father.
I didn't know who you were talking about for a second. Then I was like, the only person whose last name I know, Maxwell, is Len, or like whatever it was.
I've always assumed it was pronounced Ghislaine.
Right, there's some really unfortunate pronunciations which are all too relevant to her, but we will leave that aside. No, it's Ghislaine, and that's what I was told. With her father with his fake British accent. And so then I went to TV Guide, and then I went to the Advanced, to the new houses, and I got to work online and start their sites right after the internet started, and I loved it. And then I went to teach, and that's pretty much me. And I got a second childhood thanks to the internet, which is what I love.
Yeah.
So what is that? How has that manifested? What is the nature of the second childhood and the internet?
So I was your standard, basic, boring newspaper guy. I want bylines. I want to write stories. And on the internet, I learned that it's about conversation. And I thought that was a new thought. It wasn't. James Carey at Columbia University talks often about how republics are conversations, preferably cacophonous. And I've learned on the internet how much we're, as a society, relearning how to hold a conversation with ourselves. And so it's not about writing stories and getting bylines and having exclusives and having scoops and making content people consume. It's about how we convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation.
Yeah, and then you publish books in between this. I know that like I looked at like what would Google do. I would say like you have a very optimistic view of the internet.
To a fault.
Yeah. And I think that like this is one of the reasons kind of we got along so well is that what's like you know that like we kind of were both optimists and wanted to try to work with Facebook and this thing to like kind of make it better and thought there was room for that. And I still do. But yeah, I think that that's you're kind of in the last couple of years have really become an outlier in media in that sense.
Yeah.
Like to say the least.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And what has that been like? It is.
You and I, Kate, are, I don't want to put you in my bucket and insult you the way, but you and I are in one bucket together, which is oh my God, you talk to Facebook, they're awful and they're evil, how can you dare?
So wait, back up a second. Right. What separates the internet optimists who will talk to Facebook and, and look forward to and study the review board process from internet pessimists? What's the, rather than advocating your view, Jeff, give me a sense of what the fault line of argument is between you and the people who regard you as optimistic to a fault. I'm going to keep myself muted because there is a low-flying helicopter around here that I don't think
someone's headed to this golf course.
Golf course.
So I'm going to unmute myself only when I talk because I don't hear it.
I don't hear it.
You don't hear it?
No, I don't hear
it.
No.
Well, it's deafening here, and so I'm going to assume
you are louder than a helicopter overhead.
Keep it muted.
I think what separates is faith in my fellow man and woman. I think that I believe that in the end we'll figure it out. We figured out. I'm a Gutenberg geek. I love Gutenbergian things. I'm trying to write a book about that now, and we figured it out. There were people who thought that books would be bad for us, and that we had to control them, and we had to find the mechanisms to stop having too many books in people's heads, and we figured it out. And in the end, I believe that the internet returns us. There's a great theory about the Gutenberg parenthesis. It says we're actually leaving this exceptional period of the Gutenberg era and returning to a time of conversation. And it's something I want to get here from both of you. I want to throw out something to you both. So I was part of I'll make this as short as I can, but it's a very long title. I was part of a transatlantic high-level working group in content moderation and freedom of expression, convened by Susan Ness, former FCC commissioner. And we just released a report recommending basically a new structure of flexible framework for internet regulation, which generally the phrase internet regulation gives me hives. So the fact that I could think it was okay. So I can go into that, but I'll leave that aside. And I said to Susan Ness just last week, I said, I realized, I think just now, that the discussion that was aimed at Facebook about content moderation, which is to say, you've got to take that shit down. And then other people saying, you took my shit down. How dare you, right? And that's the fight that's going on now with the oversight board, which no one on earth knows more about than Kate, is an effort to moderate that, right? Now, I think in the last 2 weeks, because of the Harper's letter and the cancel culture and the cancel culture, what we're seeing is that discussion around Facebook is now out in the culture as a whole. And all we're really doing is trying to understand how to newly hold a conversation with ourselves, and we're negotiating norms. There was a great thread in all of this by Regina Rini, I think her name is, a Canadian academic, who talked about some people just want to add more exceptions to what is acceptable speech, and then the other side of that, the people who wrote the Harper's letter are I love this, her conceit, the status quo warriors. And so I think what we see is that same tension that Kate has studied so well and that Facebook tried to create a structure for has broken out of it's just Facebook, it's just Twitter, it's just the internet is, oh crap, yeah, it's us as a culture. We don't know how to hold a conversation with ourselves. What separates me to end this is that I'm optimistic we'll figure it out.
Yes, I think that, well, first of all, I just want to say, Ben, doesn't that sound a lot like what Andrew Moran said on Saturday? like about renegotiating norms and stuff like that. I feel like it's do you know Andrew?
No.
Jeff? Andrew,
I'm going to listen now.
Andrew is a New Yorker staff writer, author of Antisocial, which is a book about the alt-right, the rise of the alt-right on the internet. It's quite good. His writing on Reddit is fantastic. If you're just looking for a shorter piece, he wrote a great piece in the New Yorker on Reddit. But he said he was on Saturday and said almost talking about the same stuff and said very similar things to you, which was basically that, like, you know, I think we're in a norm negotiating period. He gets criticized for being a little bit too easy on tech. And what he basically says is it's not really about tech, what we're arguing about. And that's very much my same approach, has always been my same approach. And it's like, but if you look at tech, if you mention tech and you don't take a knee-jerk response, I feel that is either I'm so against you, I won't engage with you, or I will engage with you and I'm only going to talk about all of like these harms coming to rest, and I'm just going to stop the inquiry at tech, which is surely like an element that changes how the harms present themselves and how they carry themselves and how they perpetuate, but are certainly not like the last inquiry of the question. I would just also just kind of say that it just, I think of my work as very descriptive, and I don't come out all the time and I just don't have a takeaway. Like, it's not pro tech, it's not anything. It's just like, I don't like, I'm like,
it's reality.
Here's what's happening. Here's what like they're all saying. And that when I was on the market and Andrew, when he sold his book, was saying like, and I'm sure you get the same thing, Jeff, that there is just like this moment of, wow, what should we do about this? What, like, these companies are evil. Let's do something about this. And they're just, you need to do a sufficient, I think, a level of reading and research and empirical analysis before you can start getting to smart answers on that. And then by the time you kind of finish all that up, hopefully some of the norms have started to realign themselves or are starting to find like places where we should, like, we can figure out where we should kind of come down and where the norms should be or where they're going to end up. I don't know. Does that make sense? Ben, do you want to add anything? You're muted, Ben.
Muted, Ben.
Everything.
Sorry.
In that hat.
We told you should have just stayed on.
I know.
You know, now the helicopter's gone. I'll leave myself unmuted. So I'm just curious about the other side, who the major voices on the other side of this argument are. Because I don't, like, it seems to me, yes, we'll figure it out. But the question is how much damage will be done in the meantime, and whether part of figuring out is a kind of structural reform of the institutions, or whether, you know, we'll figure it out in the context of a very laissez-faire attitude toward the institutions in question. And so I guess I'm thinking of sort of people like Kara Swisher, who are deeply committed to the sort of, I don't know, the kind of venal quality of the institutions in question. Like, who do you think of as your principal antagonists in this argument?
That's a good question.
Yeah, Kara is interesting. I respect Kara, but that's going to be followed by a but.
It always is. Whenever you say I respect somebody, that's always the beginning of the sentence, right, not the end of the sentence.
So Kara did her own pivot, right? Kara was very pro-technology, and now she's pretty anti-technology, and that's very, very common, I think, among those who cover technology. They as a breed, loved it, thought it was wonderful, and now they hate it. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. I suppose the person I disagree with tremendously but respect immensely is Siva Vaidyanathan at University of Virginia, right? So Siva, where Siva and I will disagree is Siva thinks that, well, first Siva taught me, and when I would say that I wrote a book called What Would Google Do, I kind of like, you know, where they're headed. I think they're smart. And he would say, no, Jeff, they're a corporation. Corporations will do what corporations will do. And basically you shouldn't trust them. Okay, we disagree a little bit there. What Siva will say, if I hope I don't misquote him, is that it was a bad idea to connect mankind. And I think it was a good idea to connect mankind. Mark Zuckerberg fundamentally believes that a connected society is a better society. So do I. Now, in that process, again, we haven't had this conversation for 550 years since Gutenberg. We don't know how to hold it anymore. As I'm doing my research, I'm trying to work on this Gutenberg book, doing my research, I was really struck. One of the big lessons I've had is when it came to the time of Luther, he saw printing as highly conversational. He was having a conversation and a disputation with the church and with his opponents. Erasmus and Sir Thomas More were having a conversation across their books. Montaigne was trying to figure out who was I having a conversation with, right? What ended that conversational mode? It was probably steam power and mass media, in my theory now. And so I think we used to be connected, never as a whole society, but when we were connected and when we figured out how to manage it, we did better things. So that's my fundamental belief. That's what makes me somewhat sympathetic to Zuckerberg and Facebook. My complaint about Zuckerberg right now is he has no farther North Star than that. He only thinks now in statutes, not in a constitution. And I think that's the weakness of Facebook.
But hang on a second.
Go.
I want to push you on the premise.
Good.
So not because I disagree with it, but because I want to explore its parameters a little bit. Yes, when you invent the printing press, you greatly democratize information and you allow the flourishing of a conversational medium, which is initially almost entirely a religious disputation, set of religious disputations.
At first,
it's
yes.
Pivotal to the Protestant Reformation, as you describe, also pivotal to related Reformation challenges like translating the Bible into various vernaculars, including English. Similarly, when you connect all individuals point to point, you do something similar, and that allows the flourishing of lots of good information and lots of bad information. So far, I'm in agreement with you. But I do think there is an important difference. I'm not sure how important, which is that in order to participate in the printing press revolution, you have to be pretty committed. The cost of entry, not in financial terms. In financial terms, it's not trivial, but it's, in human work terms, it's quite substantial. Laying type is labor. As late as the era of the Ben Franklin printing press, it's work. People, and the human labor associated with an individual printed page is a real project, and that selects for a group of people that really care about what they're saying. The difference, it seems to me, in the social media era is that the price in human labor terms, not to mention in cost terms, of production of ideas is zero. You can send a tweet for nothing, right? It enables casual public conversation in a fashion that the press enabled committed public conversation. And I think it is a non-obvious proposition, though it might be right, that increasing the amount of casual conversation is necessarily good for discourse, because most people, if you give them recourse to casual conversation, share cat videos or the intellectual equivalent thereof. And a certain other group of people share conspiratorial crazy nonsense. And a certain other group of people share you're giving rise to voices that are really important. And it seems to me that there's a different question when you're talking about this kind of social media, about whether the balance of voices that you're advantaging and creating contributes more to the discourse or more to cacophony. And so I want to pause over that point and just ask you about it. Why are you certain that the right analogy here is to Gutenberg, rather than the right analogy being to giving everyone in the world a bullhorn and putting speakers connected to those bullhorns into everybody's living room in the world?
Or a blank brick wall and cans of spray paint, which is your review, kind of.
Sure.
I feel so honored that the counselor that the disputation is with you of all people. So I love this. I would say a few things. One, there was the belief in printing that there was too much of it, that we were going to overload. Erasmus said there are too many books. They're going to overload the mind. There's too much speech. We hear that these days, unfortunately. And so there was that same feeling of excess at the time. So what happened? Institutions were invented to deal with this, right? One was the Index of Forbidden Books by the Catholic Church that didn't end until 1966, I think it was, that created a lot of bestsellers. Another institution was the publisher and the role of the editor and the bookstore, right? And these became industries and institutions to deal with this. We haven't yet invented those industries and institutions. So right now we have, yes, a lot of speech. Now, some people, most people, all media people are regretting that. This is where I differ. I'm not. And I, without trying to virtue signal, I try to remind them that when they reject Twitter and they reject Facebook, they also reject Black Lives Matter and Living While Black and Me Too. And they reject the brave 17-year-old young woman who videotaped the death of George Floyd, who used Facebook to share that. And I think that's critical. So in what some see as an excess of voice, this is the whole point of the cancel culture argument. Those who say there's an excess of speech are saying, I had the microphone and I really don't want to share it with anyone else. And the difference now is that new voices are here. Voices who were not heard in mass media, which is run by people who look like me, old white men. And so first we have to listen to and celebrate those new voices. And I do, which is different from others. Now then, yes, we need to create institutions and structures and services to tear through that, right? When people say there's too much knowledge, well, there has been since the library in Alexandria, right? So we've always come up with systems to figure this out. And I think we will. We will find out who's worth listening to. You are that, right? You create a blog. When something happens in law, I come to you because I trust you and know you, and I'm right now sucking up to you. And that's why it's not blogging. I love blogging. I've been a blogger since 2001. Blogging is a great institution. Are there a lot of crap blogs? Of course there are. Were there too many blogs? Sure there were. But I miss those wonderful early days of blogs where we all had a voice. We had blog roles where we recommended each other, right? And we figured it out for a while until it got taken over and got to be a mess. Is everything going to get taken over and be a mess? To some extent, yes. Publishing was. But I think we'll figure this out. So what you call casual conversation is, I would say back, the privileged position of someone who already had the microphone. And the signers of the Harper's letter were just that.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. I want to go to the original question because it relates to kind of how you guys have both kind of, because it relates to where the conversation went. But to answer the original question about like who my antagonist is, I guess like you mentioned Kara and Siva, and like I would say they're probably maybe Zeynep a little bit. Mm-hmm. All of these people's work I respect entirely.
Tremendously smart, yes.
Right. But there's like they have really great insight. I respect Siva because he will continue to engage with me and have the conversation. And I've been on so many panels with him. And like, I can be like, Siva, that is not a very strong point for you because of X, Y, and Z. And like, he will think about it and change his mind about it a little bit and like kind of move forward, where some people really won't engage like that. But like Siva, I disagree with at a very, very fundamental level, exactly because of what Jeff said, which is that he thinks that basically people shouldn't have been connected. And I see that as a little bit of like a Luddite position. That's just it's a non-starter. That's, there's probably a lot of harms that you could say came out of, the invention of fire, like houses burned down now, like all of these things, right? But of course, like we all know that fire has also had these incredible, has moved society forward in this incredible way. All of this is to say, cars are great.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just like tons of hundreds of thousands of people die in car accidents. And, yet we all still like completely depend on and use cars every single day. So there's these technology things that you just don't put them back in the box. That's just not it. It's just not a very interesting place to have the conversation.
Yes, well said.
And so that's why I disagree with Siva. I disagree with Kara for a different reason. I think that Kara's level of her journalism and where she takes her reporting and empirical analysis from is from observing the upper echelon in the C-suite and the leadership of Silicon Valley. And that is honestly just not where I have spent any of my time in reporting on and observing and spending time in Silicon Valley. I have been on the factory floor of those places, I would say, and and wrapped up in the history of kind of how decisions got made and all the processes that got put down and how those changed. And so I don't think that Kara's takeaway is wrong about tech if you're just looking at the leadership. I think that it is completely accurate. People do care about the bottom line. They're hung up on power. There's a certain type of person that tries to get to the top levels at to the top 100 people at Facebook. Like there's like a whole thing, but that's just like one part of like the company as a whole and what's happening in the company. And a lot of power comes from the factory floor. And so that is just kind of an observation that I wanted to make between like how people talk. And like Joyce said in the thing, she thinks that like all Zuckerberg cares about is money. And like, I understand, like all Zuckerberg's board cares about is money. All of his shareholders care about his money. But like Zuckerberg has enough money for the rest of his life and his children's lives. He doesn't care about money anymore. It's like, I really feel like it's about legacy and institution building and all these other things. And that's what he cares about. So
yet he can't figure it out, right? Isn't it?
Right.
He's trying that's what's so
hard. And he's doing such a shit job at it. It's almost like he never even went to college. But there is like this.
Ouch.
But there is kind of, anyways, this is all to say to get back to Ben's point, and to Jeff's point, kind of loop them together, that there is kind of this interesting thing about I feel like we only have a matter of time before, as Jeff points out, the blogs become mainstream. Things become institutionalized, the norms settle and adjust, the period of democratization, the pluralism, it just falls away. And like basically a few power recapitulates itself and power lands at the top. And we have a moment now in which we can take the 17-year-old girl that like photographs or videotapes George Floyd, and we can preserve in amber some type of pathway for people like that to like, to like have a way to speak. And we don't have to recapitulate the same like gatekeepers at the top. They're going to try to recapitulate themselves. They're doing it right now, all the time, right? But like, and new people are trying to rise up from the bottom to become the gatekeepers. They don't want to remain the 17-year-old girl. But like, what we need is like, that's
the 17-year-old girls turn 18 if you give them a little bit of time.
Yes, that's true. But you see what I'm saying? The individual voice, the individual, voice.
But let me ask you about that, because I've heard a lot about, blogs. The era of blogging is over, and now people are saying the era of podcasting is over. Because what's that?
Is that why we're here? Do you think that podcasting is going to go down? It's all going to be live video shows?
No, I mean, I look at podcasting and I think it's, I look at it from the point of view of the individual producer who started the Lawfare podcast 7, 8 years ago now, and now it's daily, and tens of thousands of people listen to every episode, and it really is just still, I mean, the equivalent of recorded out of our basement. I mean, we have we have an institution now, but we built the institution on the podcast, not the other way around, or on the podcast and the blog. So I look at the blog and I say, what do they mean the era of the blog is over? Anybody who's got something interesting and different to say, the costs of entry are essentially zero. And yeah, you're competing against the New York Times, but you always were competing against the New York Times.
You never had the opportunity to compete with the New York Times before, and now you do.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's the beauty, right?
So like before, if you wanted to compete against the New York Times, you literally, this is not an exaggeration, you literally had to create an architecture where you could throw a wad of paper at every house in the country on a daily basis before 7 a.m. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't compete with the New York Times. Now all you have to do to compete with the New York Times, it's still a big project, but all you have to do is create a WordPress account.
So was that too much casual conversation? Was blogging too much?
So I think blogging was great. But I also note that Lawfare's policy, excuse me, from the beginning of the site was that we don't have a comments page. And, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are the comments page without anything else, right?
Yep.
And I do think there's an interesting question whether, and this is a completely elitist thing to say, and I'm posing the question, not asserting it, whether that degree of breakdown of authority and disruption of voices of authority is what the balance of good and bad in it is. I don't doubt that there's a lot of both. I've met a huge number of people on Twitter who are fabulous, and across all areas of my life, from the music I listen to, to political conversation, to people who are interested in miniature cannons, right? I love the cacophony of voices. Really, really love it.
And
but I'm also aware, cannons are good.
He's the Napoleon of the internet.
But I'm also aware that there really is a dark side to this. And I am a person who is, I use this word advisedly because I hate the way a lot of people use this word, but I am a person who is privileged to get all the advantages and relatively few of the disadvantages of this culture. And that for a lot of people, the role that it actually plays is not to magnify their voice, but to make it very difficult for them to determine whom they should and shouldn't be listening to. Some of them may enjoy that, but it may not be good for them. And some of them may really not enjoy it and may find it very confusing. And so I'm not saying it's bad. I'm actually not with your foes on this, but I don't think it is an obvious Gutenberg-like situation where we look back and say, yes, it opened it up. Yes, there were some lousy things published.
30-year war, Peasants' Wars,
yeah, the
Reformation.
30-year war sucks. But 50 years after that, it's not obvious to me that we're in that land, that the good will outweigh the bad.
Well, you never know. This is Kate's point. We have choices and choices right now to make. Let me tell you a ray of hope, because that's what I am, a little Mary Sunshine. and it starts with COVID, which is going to be very odd. But when COVID started, I saw that the emphasis in our world after the American election was disinformation, misinformation, trolls, bots, fake news, etc. And then I saw when COVID came along, it changed utterly. That it was really about amplifying expertise. The enemy wasn't Russia until recently. The enemy was ignorance, and the antidote to that is expertise. So I started a COVID Twitter list. If you go to bit.ly/COVID Twitter list, you'll find my 600 epidemiologists, virologists, geneticists, biologists, infectious disease experts, and it's phenomenal to watch science at work. And I believe that it was my job in journalism to amplify expertise, the same way I believe it's my job as a white man to amplify voices not heard. Well, then as I watched them, I saw that the scientists and doctors were adapting quite fluidly to a new open information ecosystem. And they said, COVID happened, oh shit, we need a lot of information fast. So they made it an ethic to put things up on the preprint servers, number one. So you had a huge number of, 15,000 papers so far on COVID, some good, some bad, up immediately on the servers so that other scientists can see them. Second problem was they didn't know how to organize that, and there have been some applications on top that give a taxonomy to them. Third and key problem was because they were preprints, there was no peer review. Well, the peer review is occurring on Twitter. There was a bad paper by John Ioannidis, or believed bad, about a Santa Clara serology test, and the virologists went nuts over it. They went nuts on Twitter, and they peer reviewed it there. And the New York Times did a bad job of just quoting the author. They all went nuts in turn, saying, you should have called us. It was all there within hours. Then the next problem was they had to review the reviewers. Who's qualified? There's a guy who's out there who just does nothing but try to get traffic to his stuff. All the doctors will tell you, don't pay attention to him. And then finally, they wanted to bring this to the public and out of their own closed world because it's so critical. And they find ways to explain things to people and to journalists too. And as Kate and I can, attest, if people can't figure out Section 230, they got a real problem with virology. And so you see this adaptation by them, not a media world, but a science world where there is a convenience of accreditation and of a taxonomy of expertise and so on. But you see them adapting to this new world in really interesting ways. Are there crap papers? Yes. Are there conspiracy theories? Yes. Are there idiots? Yes. Does bullshit go from somebody's typewriter into Donald Trump's mouth and out of his mouth and into killing people with hydroxychloroquine? Yes. All those perils exist. But they've done a superb job, really, I think, of making this new reality work. And so that's what I think Kate and I believe in, is that, like it or not, it's the new reality. There's 2.5 billion people on Facebook. I would hope that Facebook could have a North Star to figure out how to make strangers less strange, how to connect people in new and more productive ways. I haven't yet given up on whether they're going to do that or not. Maybe I will someday soon.
They're getting slightly better at it, but I still think that there is just this. I completely agree. And I think that the other thing that I think the break up Facebook, kill Facebook, get rid of Facebook, get rid of Twitter thing really gets wrong is that they have at least been trying to solve these problems with some really, really, really smart people for at least for 14 to 10 years. And yep. So there's kind of if they've put a lot of things in place. If you were to just literally blow up all the code for Facebook, blow it all up, trash the computers, have it all just disappear tomorrow, that does not mean that something like Facebook wouldn't immediately pop up as it did semi-close to the state that it was in 2006, or worse, something like the state that it's in now in terms of connectivity and algorithm, but without any of the precautions or any of the concerns about trying to keep people safe or whatever else, because that's never something that people are thinking about when they make this type of code. Or if
Kate, here's another. Sorry.
Yeah,
here's another.
True. Would you rather things be MySpace?
Well, this is the point.
Exactly.
And we put up MySpace. What did we get? We got Facebook.
Friends girl on the way.
Yeah. So there's always this
Christopher
weird. I don't
Cochler
understand
says
this.
then Parler would finally have some subscribers.
Yes. Here's the thought experiment. If you just turned off Facebook tomorrow and didn't turn anything else on, you just turn it on. You're China. You just turn it off. Is the world any better? Does it solve any of the problems we have? The problems we have are human problems. They are not technology problems.
Everything you hate about the internet is actually everything you hate about humanity.
Ding, 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 ding. Yes.
This is Kate's refrain.
It is
so I'm bringing on John Bordeaux to pose his excellent question here. Hey, John.
Hey, how you doing? I do appreciate your guest. I honestly have not heard a voice this optimistic in 4 solid months. So it's fascinating.
Sorry to corrupt you, John.
No, it's all good. You can't break through. I gave up Facebook about 2 years ago, roughly around the results of the election, probably due to what I perceive was bad behavior, but that's just my perception. I guess my question to the optimist is there a breaking point? What would make you come out against that and say, you know what, it is a mistake, it is more of a social harm, and it needs to be changed?
Great question. So what are the limits?
Question, John. I think I'm paraphrasing Kate here, is that there's probably nothing you can do about it. So it's not about turning it on or off. It's about imagining how we make choices to fix things. And that's the more productive conversation. Facebook is very difficult to be open to. They don't make it easy. They keep screwing up pretty badly. And, what I always say is I'm not defending Facebook, I'm defending the internet. And if Facebook screws up, they're going to hurt the internet. And that's exactly what's happening around Section 230. So I worry that Facebook has already hit that. I have written this often, that I don't think they have a North Star. I don't think they have a raison d'etre of why Facebook really exists, other than this very thin layer of connection. But we've seen how bad it can go, right? Reddit for a while was that bad. And then Reddit decided, okay, we're going to make some changes. And full disclosure, Twitter too, right? So they saw lines, but they still defended freedom of expression. They still saw the value in freedom of expression. Now, that can be cynically because it's too expensive to have rules. Every rule you have brings expense. 30,000 people at Facebook dealing with Netzday in Germany or variants of that. It's very expensive to have those rules, but I think they've got to have them. I think they've got to invest in them. You are always going to have a bad underbelly of society, and it is going to find its rocks to hide under. And the trick is, why do we pay so much attention to them? That's all we're doing, is give them what they want. The trick is, how do we ignore them? How do we create institutions that drive you to what you want to see and help you to ignore the assholes? That's what we need. But so, John, I don't know. I guess I would say that I think the conversation has opened. There is no turning it off. And so we will hit that line every day, and we need to, the reaction is not to turn off the switch, because we can't. The reaction is to say, okay, what do we need to fix this? I tell my students that journalists find problems, report them, and go to the bar. Entrepreneurs find problems and look for opportunities. Engineers find problems and look for solutions. And that's the fatal optimism around Silicon Valley. Is it's made up of entrepreneurs looking for opportunity, that is to say, to exploit and get money, and engineers who think they have the hubris that can fix anything. But Kate's also right that they've got smart people there who are trying to find solutions and are working on it.
Academics get problems and then get tenure, and then just all their problems.
Yeah, and then just sit around for the rest of their careers.
We stop other people from getting it then. That's the game, yes.
Yeah, pull up the ladder after you.
Yes.
So our YouTube comments, which are normally a cesspool of cat fighting, have generated some interesting questions today. And I'm just going to read some of them to you and get your thoughts. Paul Thornton writes, by this framing then, is social media a tragedy of the intellectual commons? And if so, what means do we have to mitigate bad faith discourse? Is the problem with Facebook and social media their profiteering on engagement that polarizes discourse, or ad revenues from users, or could the problem be both?
Wow, that's about 5 questions.
Yeah.
The commons, I think this goes back to John's question. The commons will inevitably go to a tragedy unless you create the institution to stop that and to come to agreement and to put a fence around something. And what media did was put a fence around the conversation. They did that, right? I can talk, you can't. I have a publisher, I have a printing press, you can't. So Now that's broken apart. New voices are here, and we're going to invent new institutions, either good or bad. The advertising piece is an important part of this because, and I teach journalism school. I want my journalists to be fed. They're going to be fed in great measure by advertising. I don't think advertising is evil. Having said that, the mass media business model was just co-opted and put onto the internet, and it's completely wrong. Because an attention-based model will lead inevitably to cats and Kardashians and Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the ultimate clickbait, right? And so that's where we were led. I don't think it's because of advertising. I don't think that Facebook and Twitter should get rid of advertising politically, because I think it takes away from small candidates and it brings us back to big money. But advertising needs to be reinvented, and advertisers need to be forced to make better choices than they make now. Now, is the advertiser boycott of Facebook going to do any good? I don't think so, really. I think that they'll make a few changes and then they'll want to be back there. The fear I have is advertisers are going to run away from news because they want to run away from any controversy. Unilever said, we're not getting rid of Facebook. We're getting rid of everything online until the end of the year, or in social until the end of the year. Why? Politics. They don't want to be near it. Well, that means they're also not going to support the conversation that occurs. So yes, advertising is a big problem here, but it's also going to be our support, and we've got to figure out how to reform it as well.
That's such a great point. I didn't know that Unilever decided to do that. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
All right, so next question. This one's from Pontiac Silverado, who writes, an interesting phenomenon in digital technology has been the convergence toward large market players, because honestly, people aren't interested enough to research and diversify their technology usage. We used to have hundreds of models of cell phones, and now we have just two major alternatives. There were dozens of well-trafficked search engines in the early 2000s. And I just lost, now just one. Netflix, a horrible service provider with horrible content, is dominant. People just converge on one player because people either lack the necessary interest or the effort required to inquire further. Newspapers and TV channels profit off of ad dollars. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a different issue. So I guess what she is asking is, aren't we converging toward a single or a few very dominant players in the social space, and what are the implications of that?
Yes and no.
I hope I'm distilling her question correctly from the information that's there, and I apologize if I'm somehow recasting it, but that's what I took away from it. So what do you think?
On the one hand, Facebook and Twitter are two dominant players. True. In Cleveland, you get only the Cleveland Plain Dealer. That's all you get. But on the other hand, Facebook and Twitter give us far more voices than we ever had. And so in the ecosystem of media and content, if you want to look at it that way, though I don't think the internet is media, in the grand conversation of society, we have far more voices than we've ever had. In music, you have far more musicians than you've ever had. In creativity, think what you will of TikTok. And by the way, I want to hear if you think it could be, if banning it would be a First Amendment issue. You have creativity that becomes collaborative in all kinds of new ways. So will it gravitate toward the big? Yes, it does that. Capitalism does that. But the big also bring in a lot of littles. Now, can I ask you about that point? Pompeo, who wants to believe Pompeo? He just tells things to get headlines. But just for the sake of law school fun, the government banning TikTok, is there a First Amendment case there?
The government can't.
Of course there is.
Yes,
they can't.
The government
Okay,
can't ban TikTok.
Can't be done.
Yeah, I got like 3 emails from my students about like, can the government do this? And I was like,
no.
Have I taught you nothing?
The entity that can ban TikTok is Apple.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that's actually what I was gonna say.
and Google.
What I wanted to say to follow up on this question, which I think is a false equivalency. What's really interesting about your point, Jeff, is like, yes, it used to be when we talk about filter bubbles and like the layers in which we kind of insulate ourselves from views that are outside our own. And this is like the polarity that people talk about politics and everything else. But really, like, this is something that we've always done. Like, you were into horses, so you'd subscribe to like Horse and Rider and Town and Country magazine, or you were into sports, so you subscribed to Sports Illustrated, and you saw only that type of stuff, right? That was what you subscribed to. And now you're actually kind of maybe forced to see like some of the the opposing views that you could have like literally sat in your house and just ignored 100% of the time if you wanted to. So that's one point. But to the other point, actually, the point about like the consolidation, we don't have Zunes anymore. We have, even iPods, we have it all in like our Android or our phones. This kind of collapse of like the world of possible technologies. So a lot of it used to be open source. Now it's not. As Ben says, you can't, like, Apple has the power to block things. Government. And I think that's a really great point. And basically, I think that there is this change in, like, actually, Jonathan Zittrain wrote about this in the end of, like, the internet and how to stop it, which was very kind of clever. And talks about the ability of generativity to actually change your hardware and to play with your software, and for that to actually harness innovation and potential and democratic potential of people to reach each other. Yeah, exactly. And like that has all gone away. And I think those are absolutely real problems. In fact, I think Apple is maybe one of the most insidious companies, far more so than like I think Facebook or Twitter is. And I can't get away from it. It's everywhere around me right now. So like, I think that says something. I'm pretty technically advanced. I used to replace my hard drive. Even when it was solid state drives, I'd solder in a new hard drive. You can't even do that in these machines anymore. They keep making changes to completely extinguish your ability to alter them. So anyways, I will wrap up because we have one last question. Ben, go ahead.
We have two last questions. We're going to take them in sequence, and then Jeff, you address them as you see fit. The great Vishnu Kannan. Vishnu.
Hey, Vishnu.
I feel like I'm getting to know all of you. So my question is really about Jeff's kind of, I guess, vision that the goal really is to try to build new institutions within the technology space that allows people to sort through the information instead of trying to tamp down on the flood of information. And it seems like that makes a lot of conceptual sense, but then when I start playing it out in my head, it seems like you get back to the traditional institutions which governed what truth is, right? You say, okay, I don't want, as someone else in the question said, a journalist at the Times to have the same voice as a random person on Twitter. But then the answer to that, for me at least, seems to be, okay, well then you create an institution like the Times and you get an editorial process and you go full circle.
All right, that's, I think we lost our other questioner. Let me see if I can bring him back.
This is the pressure of the blue button. It's hard, Kate.
Yes,
we don't know how hard it is.
I'm not sure what happened to him. I'm still learning this system, and James Malloy seems to have vanished.
No, he says I'm here somehow.
He says I'm here somewhere.
Oh, are you here?
Well, he's there in the chat.
I can,
yeah,
he can type it.
I'll just read his question because he seems to have vanished into the ether.
James asked if part of the problem with the internet is that now an anonymous person now has a voice just as loud as a journalist for the New York Times. Do you think that given no other change, people will adapt and learn to sort through the noise? Thought.
So I've noticed a sociological oddity that whenever you get more than one question, people always start with the latter question, then go back to the first if they remember it. So I'll do that because I think it's traditional. So
that's
James
why,
first.
Right?
Yes. So anonymity. I hear this all the time, of course, that anonymity is a problem, but I can give you many assholes by name. I don't think anonymity solves the problem, right? At the same time, cowards find anonymity to be a cloak. They hide behind it. So it can be a problem to an extent. Facebook, of course, the irony of Facebook was Facebook depended upon real identity, at least in the early days, and was going to solve all of that with that. And we call now Facebook the cesspool of cesspools, which I don't think it is, but fine. So no, I don't think anonymity is a problem. And we always have to point out that anonymity is also a tool for the vulnerable. And so in any system we create, we have to leave a place for the vulnerable. We have to leave a place for the trans kid somewhere in Western Pennsylvania who doesn't have a place in the world, right? Or the person, or the gay person in Nigeria who feels threatened, and so on and so on. So the systems have to have that. And that was the problem when Wael Ghonim in the Arab Spring said to Facebook, by requiring verified identity, you're stopping me from helping spark the Arab Spring and all that went right and wrong with that. Now back to Vishnu's question. I think this is what fascinates me. I think that we're not necessarily, when you said the goal is to invent institutions, I'm not sure that I believe that. I think it's just an inevitability that institutions will rise. And it is not necessarily the institutions that existed. So the question for institutions that exist now, all of them, is whether they can adapt and whether they will adapt or whether they become obsolete. There's a book I read some years ago I quite enjoyed called The Institutional Revolution, in which an economist looked at the economic bases of institutions that were obsolete in England, like the aristocracy, private roads, lighthouses, dueling, buying army commissions. And he looked at the economic basis of why those existed. And they were because you couldn't measure things to keep people accountable. So you made your lords sink all of their money into a fancy estate. So if they screwed up, or the daughter you sent to court screwed up, yeah, you got a fancy estate, but you got no liquidity, you're stuck with it, right? And these things live on past their useful life. Is policing an institution that is living on past its useful life as we've invented it? Yes, I think it's proving that. We need to reinvent it. Has journalism lived past its useful life in the way we invented it? I'm a journalism professor, I'm going to be careful here, but yes, we have to reinvent it. Will the institutions that now hold that position be successful at it? Who the hell knows? I'm too old. It'll all happen after I'm gone.
Let's leave it there. Jeff Jarvis, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be here. I'm your great fan, and both of you, and thank you so much.
This was so fun.
Thank you.
This is exactly the way I wanted to end my day, with a very sweaty beer and Jeff Jarvis and Ben Wittes. So awesome.
So tomorrow is McGirt Day. We have invited Ian Gershengorn, who argued the case on behalf of, the criminal defendant, who is sort of at the center of it, but in practice, he was making arguments on behalf of the tribes. We are also, I've asked Rebecca Nagel, who did the very great podcast series on the predecessor case to this called This Land. I haven't heard back from her, not sure if she can join us. And I'm going to try to find somebody who helped represent the state of Oklahoma on this, although that may be tricky because those people are state officials and they're less likely to come on freewheeling discussions than private sector lawyers. So at the very least tomorrow, we will have the counsel of record on behalf of Mr. McGirt to talk about the case. I hope we will have more people than that, but we'll see what we get, which will all happen 22 hours and 56 minutes from now. And until then, Kate, what do we say?
We don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, we can still be anonymous on the internet.
And we can be optimistic about Facebook.
Yeah, Ben. Wow, that was you. That was the face to follow that comment up with. That was good. Oh, you guys are the best. I will see you guys soon.
We'll
Bye,
see you tomorrow.
Bye, Ben.